Well, good morning everybody. We're going to try some Volvoing today. As some of you will have seen, we picked up this Volvo project a few weeks back. We wanted the rooftop tent, came with a Volvo. That's okay. It's got a few issues though. It's running pretty rough, doesn't start sometimes. The guy had it diagnosed as a few misfires, but he did provide me with a bunch of service documentation. Reading through that, I'm hopeful that maybe it's something we might be able to fix easily. We're not looking to put a lot of money or effort into this project, but if it's something easy, then we'll give it a crack, see if we can breathe some life back into her. So first thing we need to do is run all the codes. And we actually cheated and did this a few weeks ago. And as you can see, it's got a lot of codes, lots and lots and lots of codes. In fact, it says every injector is open, which means every injector is not working. By my understanding, if none of the injectors are getting power, then none of the injectors are putting fuel in, and that would mean that this car is currently running on no fuel at all. So given that it does run, I think that might be wrong. So having a look through all this, I think that potentially someone has turned the ignition on with a whole bunch of stuff unplugged, and that's caused a whole bunch of errors and a whole bunch of spaz outs in the computer. So we're going to clear all this, or we have cleared all this, and we're going to run it for a few weeks. And so now here we are, a few weeks later, we've been running it, and we're going to check on the codes again, see what's really going on.
Go.
Okay, so we can see that the misfire, random misfire cylinder 3, then it's also got a pending code on cylinder 3, so continuing to get misfires on cylinder 3. It also has a pending code on cylinder 2, so cylinder 2 hasn't misfired enough for it to be a major issue yet. I also know, I've been checking this periodically, that cylinder 2 misfire is actually a new code. I haven't seen that before, but I did drive it a little harder the other day to just sort of give it a bit of a stress test. Basically, the easiest thing to do is start with the simplest checks first. So the simplest thing to check on this motor is the coil packs, which are what help deliver the spark. So old motors, you had a distributor, and in newer motors, you have a coil pack. So coil packs, one on each cylinder, distributor, one for all the cylinders. So we're going to open up the cover here, and what we'll probably do, given we're getting misfires on cylinders 2 and 3, we'll switch the coil packs from cylinders 2 to 3 to 2 other cylinders, and we'll see if those misfires move. If they move, then great. We know it's the coil packs, we can just replace those, simple fix. If they don't move, then we know it's something more than that. It could be the spark plugs, it could be the injectors, and we'll decide if we want to get into this any deeper or not. So first thing Cohen's going to do is pull the covers off the motor, and we'll identify the cylinders and move the coil packs from cylinders 2 and 3 across to the others. So you ready to get stuck into this, Cohen?
Okay.
Let's do it. Okay, so here we are. These are our coil packs. And they go 1,
2, 3, 4, and then 5.
Yeah, so when you're looking at your motor and you want to identify the cylinders, best thing to do is just go online and spend some time researching. Check on a few different sources, and you'll get some confirmation. Don't just go to the first source. Also be careful, so when they're describing it, don't listen to anything like passenger side or driver's side, because it's different in different countries. Get a nice clear description like left to right from looking at the front, or closest to the timing belt or something. So we found both of those for this motor, and we're very confident that number 1 starts on the left here, looking from the front of the car and closest to the timing belt. So as Cohen showed, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what the plan is, we're going to switch them out. So we're going to move number 2 and number 1 and number 3, and because it's easiest, we're going to go to, yep, that's right, number 5. And then if our misfire moves, then we know it's the coil pack. If it doesn't move, then we know it's something else. Now, right now, Cohen is undoing cylinders 1 and 2, and we're going to switch them over.
Come on. Yeah. There we go.
All right, there we go. Got our 2 retaining bolts off. So then we can just carefully reach in, just pry these off. They're just a rubber boot. Pop. And pop. Okay, so some people will take these all the way out before removing the plugs, but I'm going to remove the plugs in place just because, as you can see, these wires are getting old. So we're going to move them the least amount possible. So I'm just going to take these off in place here. So there we go, we've removed those, and then it's just as simple as pulling these out and moving them over.
Wow.
Just putting these back in place now. Shall we get them lined up properly? Clip back on. Good.
There we go.
And now we'll do the same for 3 and 5.
Yeah. Unscrew, unscrew.
There's one.
Pop. Pop.
1, 2. Let's see what we find in here. Let's have a look down in the spark plugs for number 3. There's a little oil down in there. Nothing too much there. Alright, so we're going to put these in, just make sure we actually switch them over, we don't put them back where they came from. Into number 3. There we go, there's all our coil packs switched out. So now we're just going to put our covers back in. There we go, all back together. Alright, so here we are, we've got our check engine light back on. Let's see what our codes are.
And
What have we got?
P0303.
Cylinder 3 still, and then cycle through with that DTC button. Come.
This one? Okay.
Yep, just cylinder 3. Okay, so we still got cylinder 3. It wasn't the coil pack, but hey, at least we didn't go out and spend money on coil packs for no reason. So next, let's go back in and we'll check the spark plugs. So we're back inside and we've pulled the coil pack from cylinder 3. So now we're going to pull the spark plug. There it goes. It's always good to do the free stuff first. You know? Check all the things that don't cost you any money, especially on a cheap project. You don't want to overinvest in the beginning to find out you've got major problems. Okay, so here is the spark plug out of our problem cylinder, cylinder 3. And the first thing I notice has got a lot of oil in the threads, a lot of black residue around it. It doesn't look like it's very healthy, and so hopefully this could be our problem. But there's a few things we can check. So the first thing we want to check is the gap. So the gap is the little space between our 2 electrodes. We've got our center electrode and our ground electrode. That gap needs to be just the right size so the spark is big enough to ignite our fuel air mixture, but the gap can't be so big that the spark fails to jump it. So I've looked it up, and the spark gap on this motor should be 0.75-ish. They're saying 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters. So what we use is we've got our feeler gauge over here, and our feeler gauge has all these different thicknesses of metal with their measurements on them, and we just find a set that says that adds up to the right amount. And so 0.75 is a nice easy one. We can just use 0.5 and 0.25. All right, so here we are. We've got our 0.5 and our 0.25, and we can squeeze them together, which gives us 0.75, and then we're going to check our gap. So you just slide it in there carefully and then give it a jiggle. See if we've got room to move. Just a very light jiggle. Does it feel like it's smooth or tight or loose? How's it feel, Cohen?
Feels a bit loose, but you couldn't put, I don't think you could put any more in there.
Okay.
Unless it was like the thinnest one.
Okay, so we're pretty close. We're pretty close. It's not ridiculously big or ridiculously small. So that's probably not going to be our problem. But again, I am concerned about the actual condition of the plug. I think the spark plug and the cylinder got contaminated at some point. But to make sure, we can switch this over. We could try and clean up the electrodes, but I'm going to leave it just the way it is. I'm going to switch it with number 1 here. So you can see number 1 still got a big carbon buildup, but it's not caked on like the other one. So we'll switch them over and we'll see if our misfire changes cylinder. So let's put this all back together and go for a run. All right, team, we are back and we have good news and bad news. Good news is we finally have a diagnosis. I think we've worked out what's going on with this motor. The bad news is it's not what we had hoped. So a little bit of a rundown of what just happened. We took the car for a drive and we pretty quickly started getting cylinder 3 misfires still. So that means that moving the spark plugs, moving the coil packs hasn't moved the misfire and the problem. Okay, so normally my next plan of attack would be to check the injectors. So you can see there's an injector in here and there's 5-cylinder motor, so there's 5 of those along this is the fuel rail here. So you'd pull the full fuel rail and switch over the injectors and see if the injectors are the problem. However, firstly, I know the injectors have been looked at fairly recently. The documentation from the previous owner said that someone had looked at it. There you can see a couple more injectors, one there and one there, and there's a couple more, one there and one there. So the previous owner had them looked at and cleaned, so fairly recently. So probably not the injectors. I would still do it, except that we had some other symptoms when we were driving, so we know that it's not the injectors. So what actually happened when we went on our last drive is once we got those codes back, we decided to put some higher octane fuel in it, put some cleaner in it, and just kind of give it the old Italian tune-up, hit some hills under heavy acceleration just to see what had happened. It was time to put a bit of a stress test on the motor. When we did that, we got a new code. That was the O2 sensor. We also got a flashing check engine light, which means we're doing damage to the motor. Usually that means that unburnt fuel or something's getting through the catalytic converter to the O2 sensor. So those two together made sense that something pretty major was going on. We also lost a whole heap of performance, so the engine actually bogged down, didn't want to run properly, we had to pull over. Fortunately, we didn't get a video of it, we're in the middle of traffic and stuff like that, and I didn't particularly want to repeat it. And then we limped it home, and what we found is we had lost a lot of coolant again. Don't believe we're losing coolant externally, and so what we did is we pulled the dipstick and the filler cap, and we have milky residue on the filler cap, and we have milky residue on the tip of the dipstick there. The oil itself still looks to be okay, but I think a bit of moisture is getting through into the oil area, and that would explain it. So we're going to call this a blown head gasket, unfortunately. But hey, at least we worked it out without spending any money. And that's always a good start, you know, no extra money into the project. A blown head gasket pretty much does explain all the issues we've been having with this motor and all the little hints and clues we've received along the way. So obviously we've got the misfire in cylinder 3 is the big one. We've been getting occasional misfire in cylinder 2 as well. When we pulled those spark plugs, we saw cylinder 3 was pretty bad, had a lot of build up on it. I thought that was from poor firing, but it's also probably contamination from coolant getting in the cylinder as well. And explain why. It still does run a lot of the time. It runs when it's not under heavy load. It idles all right, but also it doesn't start very well. So probably what happens is as it sits, the pressure in the cooling system forces a little bit of fluid into the cylinder, and so on that first startup we're getting a really rough start and idle. Then as that little bit of moisture goes out the back through the exhaust, then it cleans up the idle a bit. So it all kind of fits in and makes sense. So unfortunately for this particular car, a blown head gasket, pretty much a financial write-off, totals the car out, because here in Australia they're looking sort of at $2,000 give or take for a head gasket job, probably more because it's a Volvo and everything else that's involved in it, and the car's just not worth sinking that kind of money into it. If I had more time, I would love to tackle the job myself. I've never done one before, but when you've got a car like this that you've got nothing into, and it's a great learning curve, and I'd advise it to anyone who has the time, but unfortunately I don't. So we've come up with a bit of a different plan. So there is a little bit of a silver lining in this, and that's that I don't think it's blown particularly badly. So the things that tell me it's not too bad is it runs, it idles, it doesn't overheat. So in all the time we've had it, probably about 150, 200 kilometers on it now. Whilst we have had coolant issues, it's never overheated. We've had a bit of temperature changes as that coolant's gotten low, but never overheated. So that's a good sign. It runs, it idles, it doesn't overheat. And so what we might do is use this as a bit of a chance to test a head gasket sealant. I wouldn't normally advise this, but given that we've essentially decided this vehicle's a financial write-off, it doesn't hurt to try, and you never know, we might get some luck out of it. I've had a lot of reading on the internet and seen varying success on different vehicles. To be honest, I'm not super hopeful, but it's worth a try. And so I think I might make a separate video for that one, and we'll do a bit of a product test, and come follow us for that one. You can see how that goes. But for right now, hey, at least we got a diagnosis. We didn't spend any money. And as I said, this channel, it's all about keeping cars running on a budget, you know, keeping your old beater going. So hey, why not? Let's try the head gasket sealant. So join us next time and we will grab some head gasket fix and see how we go.
Drop a like, follow us, and check out our next video.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Bye. Bye.